Namaste everyone. Thank you so much for coming back to my channel. It's the Chess Puzzler for you. Today I am going to present a second chapter of Queen and Pawn endings as described by one and only Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan in his legendary book Winning Chess Endings. This chapter addresses two types of queen endings. One is the basic queen ending and the queen versus queen ending. We are going to learn the principles of both while keeping an eye out for specific patterns and tactics that will help you understand them. In a basic queen ending, the queen fights to prevent a lone pawn from promoting, and in a queen versus queen endings, it in which the superior side is trying to advance a pawn for the second queen, the strategy is far more complex. The key to both of these endings, as we shall learn, is the position of kings. As a chess player, most of us would have their favorite piece as a queen because it's quite powerful. It can go in a lot of directions where many pieces can't. However, as the game evolves, when the pieces become increasingly powerful and increasingly valuable because they begin to control even more squares. This is especially true of long-range bishops and rooks. As the board becomes less cluttered with pawns and pieces, the firepower of queen, however, radiates extremely. Let's dive into one of the examples that the Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan has shared with us. In this one, he was quite delighted to have the white pieces. The black pieces are completely wiped out with a check. So white would play something like queen to e5. The king will go to d8. Queen takes on b8 with a check. King goes to e7. Queen comes back to e5 with a check. King d8. Queen takes on h8 with a check. King c7. Queen goes to h2 with a check once again. And as you can see, in terms of material, white has taken more than a queen's worth. A queen is like what, 9 points, but in this example, we saw that the queen has taken two knights and a rook, which is about 11 points. Such positions were extremely enchanting for the Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan, and just like many of us, Queen was the apple of his eye. However, in his learning journey, when he would gloat over all the captures that his queen would make, he was particularly confounded when it was shown to him that the queen can be tripped up by just a single lowly pawn. And for that reason, we are going to start with our first topic in the queen versus pawn endings, which is about a queen that goes against a pawn which is on either B, D, B, let me just mark B, D, E, or G files. So the example that he has shared with us to illustrate this particular pattern is what we see on the screen right now. Imagine that a pawn race has resulted in white queening his pawn with a check. Right? It might just have happened right now that the pawn queened on d8 with a check. Black is desperate to promote his pawn. It's just one square away, but has to spend time to move his king out of check. How can white win the game? You should quickly recognize that white's only path to victory is to bring his king back to capture the e2 pawn. Well, there's no other way. And help deliver checkmate. Because the queen cannot win alone. Although queen is quite powerful, it can go in a lot of directions. A queen alone cannot deliver a checkmate, so it has to be with the help of the king. Now, black plays, say, king e3. Black threatens to queen his pawn. White must prevent this. He plans to harass the black king and force it to e1, which is the pawn's promoting square. What happens if the king is going to be an e1? It just means that the pawn cannot move there. This will be followed by queen h4 because now if the pawn pushes, the queen can simply take. King to d2, trying to protect the even square to allow promotion. But now queen goes to d4 for a check. King c2, queen e3. So queen can capture the pawn on e2 as well as on e1 once it promotes because nothing is guarding these squares. King comes to d1 to the pawn's rescue, and queen d3. If the king goes anywhere to Okay, so just two options right now. If the gift king goes to c1, then white can simply capture the pawn, and it's instant game over for black. So to delay that, king will go to e1. So this was the objective that we were trying to meet. Black makes this sad but unnecessary move as he has to protect the e pawn. Without the threat of promotion, white can use the tempo to bring back his king. This procedure is repeated throughout the ensuing play. Now, let's bring our king. King f2, queen d2. So now, of course, the pawn cannot move because there will be a check. So it's an illegal move. King goes to f1, queen f4 check, king g1, queen e3 check, king f1, queen f3 check, and king goes back to e1. So we did the same thing right now from the f file, what we had done from the d file earlier. We forced the king to go back to the e1 square. And now once again, white gains time to bring his king closer. And that's what white is going to do. King to d5. Right? And this will force king to make the move king d2, queen f2. We are going to repeat all the moves all over again now from the d file. King d1 and queen d4, king c2, queen e3, and king d1, queen d3, king e1, and king e4. The king started from b7, but now it is on e4. You can see how closer it has already come. Now, black will go to f2, queen f3, and king e1. Because if the black king goes to g1, then white will simply capture. And we have king d3. White captures the pawn and checkmates on the following move. This was an example when the opponent pawn was on the e file. You can position the pawn on either b, d, or g files and try to win the match. The superior side will always be able to win with a tempo to bring his king closer and to pick off the passer pawn. Let us move to another set of example where a queen is fighting against a pawn or an h pawn. And that's what you see on the diagram right now. We have an opponent pawn which is on the a file, which is only one square away from promotion. Uh, H files and A files are usually quite tricky in a lot of different scenarios, which includes the one that we see on the screen right now. The reason for Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan's disdain for H and A pawns is that they were limited and could capture in only one direction. You can see it can capture just on one square, right? It cannot go on to different squares. In general, H and A pawns do have less value than the other pawns. They redeem themselves in basic queen endings, and that's why when you have a pawn, when you are defending a position, and if you have a pawn on A or H file, it's slightly easier for your side because the aggressors will not be able to very easily capture it, especially when it's a queen ending like the one we see. Now let's see why this position, despite being queen up, is actually a draw, and why did that shock the Grandmaster Yasser. Queen starts with a basic move. It's going to be a check. It's going to force the king onto their promoting square and then try to push forward the king so that we can take the passer. It's the same principle that we did in the last theme as well. King will go to b1, queen b4, king c2, queen a3, king b1, queen b3, and king is forced on a1. But what do you see is the difference in this case? Can we move the king closer to the pawn, to the black pawn? No, we can't because Black King has nowhere to go right now. So in the next move, it's going to be stalemate. So the only thing that we can do right now is, I don't know, move the queen somewhere and keep playing this dance, not allow black to promote, and at the same time not being able to push your white king forward to deliver a checkmate. Eventually, it's a draw. So this made Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan realize that there must be some zone of squares where the white king should be present so as to force a win on the opponent side, even if the pawn, especially when the pawn is on either A or H files. So to further explain that, he repositioned the white king, just for the sake of this example, he repositioned this white king somewhere closer to the black king. The idea is for the white king to be close enough to this pawn and also bring the queen close enough to this pawn to eventually capture it and then deliver a checkmate to the black king. So here begins the dance. Queen b6, king goes to a3, queen a5, and after king b3, queen b5, king goes back to a3, and now we are going to restrict the movements possible for the black king by king c2. After which, as you can see, all of these squares are not available for the black king, which means the only move possible for black is to move its pawn. It can either queen itself. If it queens itself, then it's queen b3 checkmate. And if it promotes to something lesser, like a knight with a check, then king moves to c3, knight c2, and queen b3 checkmate. So what Yasser discovered was by this particular example, he discovered that area of squares that start and end like this. So all the squares, including the ones on the edge, all the squares inside of this area, if we have the white king in somewhere in this area, then white can enforce a win on black despite having a pawn which is just one square away from promotion on A file or the H file. Let's take another example to convince ourselves that we are in the right zone for checkmating the opponent king. As we can recall that this was the area on or within which the white king should be so as to deliver a checkmate to the black king. Now in this case, white will start with queen f6, king goes to b1, queen f1, king b2, queen e2, king b1, and now king c4. We allowed the promotion to the queen. This will be followed by king b3. Now we remember that the white king was inside the zone, which means a checkmate should be possible. And now as you can see, all of these squares, sorry, all of these squares are unavailable for the black king to go to, which means, and if, for example, if the black king just moves to the only possible square, which is c1, then queen c2, checkmate. So black will move its queen somewhere out, and it's going to be checkmate anyway. So the exercise for you right now, the challenge for you right now is going to be for you to place this white king anywhere inside this particular region and try to deliver a checkmate to black. With that, we are going to hop to the next topic, and we are going to cover a situation where a queen is battling a c or an f pawn, as we can see in this particular case. This is quite confusing because the c and f pawns could also withstand the power of a queen, a typical situation that we see on the screen. In this position, white's king is even closer than before. Despite this added advantage, the position is actually just drawn. And why is that? We start with something like queen b6, king goes to a1. Black avoids stepping onto c1, the promotion square, which would allow white time to draw his king closer to c pawn. Another bad move would be something like king c3, which can be followed by queen d4, king b3, and queen a1, which successfully neutralizes the black's pawn. So basically, the king cannot move closer to the pawn to guard it on c2 or c1, which is why king will have to go somewhere farther away from the pawn And in the next step, the queen will have the pawn. To avoid that, black plays king a1, followed by queen d4 nonetheless, king b1, queen b4, king a1, queen c3 check, king b1, and queen b3 check. White has managed to maximize the potential of his queen. Unfortunately, the queen is too strong for its own good. It's the same situation that we had seen in the last scenario when the pawn was on the a file. King just goes to a1. Now you'll see all of these squares are not available for the black king. So if we try to bring our king closer to the pawn, then it's stalemate. Then in that case, black will simply promote, and it's going to be a draw. But white does not want that. Also, is the case of a stalemate if black simply captures. Because if queen captures, then once again all these squares are going to be unavailable for the black king to go to, and therefore it's going to be stalemate. So if you are thinking that there must be a winning zone in which if the white king is already present, then white should be able to enforce a checkmate to black king, then yes, you thought that right. In this situation, as you can see right now, the pawn is on the c file. The box that we see that starts from a5 to d5 and from d4 to g4 to g1. If the white king is present on or within this particular area on the chessboard, then white is in good position to force a checkmate on the black king. So a challenge for you is to keep the king where it is right now on d5 or anywhere in this entire area that we see on the chessboard and try to force a checkmate on black.
With that, we bring the first installment of Queen versus Pawn endings to a close. There's a lot more to come in this chapter, so please stay tuned. And once again, all the credit goes to the great Grandmaster Yasser Seirawan and his book Winning Chess Endings. For now, it's the Chess Buster signing out.